If you heard a wounded groan echoing from the forest, would you run or step closer? In 1988, deep in the foggy mountains of Missouri, a retired firefighter named Gordon Hale heard something strange, a wounded groan echoing through the forest. He followed it and found a massive creature caught in a steel bear trap. But instead of fear or aggression, it looked at him with something else, pain and trust. Gordon freed it, and everything changed. From that moment on, traps were mysteriously destroyed, hunters thwarted, and when a young girl went missing, she was found alive, protected by footprints no human could have left. The truth: not every legend wants to hurt us. Some remember kindness. This story is drawn from Gordon's journals, local reports, and eyewitnesses who never spoke publicly until now. In the next few minutes, you'll discover the quiet war between man and myth, why a child survived winter in the wild, and how a silent bond was formed between a man and something no one dared name. If you skip this video, you might miss the one story that proves mercy still echoes in the woods. So, where are you watching from? And how far do you think this story can go? If this touched something in you, like subscribe, and help us grow a community that still believes in mystery, in kindness, and maybe, just maybe, in Bigfoot. With all our warmth and respect, thank you for being here. A damp, metallic scent floated in the wind like something forgotten but suddenly remembered. Gordon Hale, 53, paused at the edge of his porch as the breeze pressed up against his wool jacket. Sable Fork Creek muttered somewhere below the rise, hidden by reed and stone, by fog and memory. The cold had settled early this year. You could feel it in the bones of the land. The leaves, wet and heavy, clung to each other like secrets. It was the kind of afternoon where nothing moved unless it had reason to. And Gordon had one. He took the switchback trail slow, boots skidding now and then on the slick limestone outcrop. Each step had weight, not just from the mud, but from something he couldn't name. That smell, like rust and soil crushed under fear, led him. His breath was quiet, barely fogging the air. Down where the willows leaned in like eavesdroppers, he caught sight of a shape. Not an animal in panic, not a boar thrashing or a wounded buck dragging its ribs through briar. No, this was still. Monument still. A large figure crouched low, one leg bent awkwardly, locked in place by a jagged steel snare nearly swallowed by marsh grass. Its chest rose and fell slow, rhythmic, like someone trying not to make noise while in pain. Gordon didn't move closer just yet. He stood there, letting the sight settle into his blood. It wasn't that he didn't believe what he was seeing. It was that some things make you hesitate not from doubt, but from awe. The creature's face, what little he could see through the mist and branches, wasn't the face of a beast. There was fur, yes, heavy across its arms and chest, matted in places with mud. But the face had shape, meaning. It watched him. Not with fear, not with rage, just with presence, like someone aware of being watched and choosing to return the gaze, calmly. He knew this trap. The iron teeth were serrated, custom welded. Not a hunter's standard issue. Bo Slater. That man had a sickness for control, believed the forest owed him something. He'd been warned after the last winter, after a coyote lost half its jaw to one of these. But Bo kept setting them, hiding them deep. 2 layers, sometimes 3. The kind that didn't just catch. They punished. And now here this thing was, caught but not flailing. Bleeding, yes, but quiet. As if it knew thrashing would only make it worse. Gordon knelt, keeping a respectful distance, as if approaching someone else's campfire. His knees cracked. He winced. Years working the back road trail crews had left his joints full of old stories. He reached into his coat. not for a weapon, but just to brace himself on the ground. He could see now, bits of wire and rusted mesh hidden beneath the reeds. A secondary snare, meant to spring if someone tampered with the first. Bo was clever like that. Not smart, just cruel with a memory. He didn't speak. Not a word. No point. Whatever this was, it didn't need noise. Just time. Just witnessing. The creature shifted slightly, the way someone might when trying to keep balance without jostling a broken limb. That same strange patience still in its eyes. Gordon noticed then how little blood there was for a wound like that. Not because it hadn't bled, but because it had clotted. Thick, dark, stubborn. It had been there a while. Maybe since morning. Maybe longer. He should have called someone. Fish and Game, the sheriff, anyone else. Let them deal with this. Let them make sense of it. He could even turn around, say he never saw it. No harm done. But he didn't move. Because something about the way that creature looked at him, direct but unexpectant, said it wouldn't ask for anything, wouldn't plead, wouldn't chase. It would just wait. And maybe that's what got to him, that quiet willingness to endure. He stood, backed up slow, still no words. He'd be back before dark. He told himself that like a vow, though no one had asked him for one. He climbed the trail slower this time. Wet leaves slicked the rock. His lungs burned from the cold, but his hands shook less than before. At the cabin, he gathered what he had. A strip of burlap he used for wrapping saplings, an old oil lamp, his canteen, a pouch of dried herbs from Martha Lowell, who'd taught him long ago which plants numbed and which ones cleaned. She was the kind of woman who believed in tending things that no longer asked to be tended. He remembered the way she looked at wounds, not as things to cure, but as things to honor. The sun dropped behind the ridge quick, that kind of autumn dusk that doesn't warn you, just falls. Gordon packed everything into an old fishing bag, hesitated only once at the doorway, then stepped out again into the fog. The trail back down would be darker, harder to read. But he knew the steps now, and more than that, he knew he'd been seen. And not as a threat. Not yet. Behind him, the creek whispered against stone. Somewhere in the far-off timber, a crow gave one sharp cry, then stopped. Gordon didn't flinch. Some sounds aren't warnings. They're acknowledgments, like someone saying, "I saw that too." Halfway down the path, he paused to test the oil lamp. It caught with a soft flick, casting an amber ring no wider than his outstretched arm. He angled it low. He didn't want to scare whatever still waited. He passed the switchgrass that always curled near the bend, past the moss-slicked tree where once a storm split bark clean down the middle, past the old footprint he thought was a bear's last spring, though now he wasn't so sure. The reeds opened again, revealing the same clearing, the same weight. The figure hadn't moved much, just shifted a little to lean against the embankment. Gordon placed the lamp down behind a stone so the light glowed indirect, soft. He pulled the burlap from his bag and laid it out, checked the wire again. That second snare was still there, like a threat with a grin. He didn't try to talk, just crouched, checked the tension on the spring, felt the old metal vibrate under his palm. He hadn't brought gloves. Stupid. The steel was cold enough to bite. He unwrapped the herbs, leaves crushed and dried with a piney bitterness that hit the nose first. Set them nearby. The creature didn't move, but Gordon felt it watching. He reached forward with the pry bar he'd brought, a rusty old thing from his father's shed, and slid it beneath the base of the trap. It took 2 tries before the bar found leverage. Every creak of the metal echoed too loud in that quiet space. Every shift in his boot threatened to trigger something. He paused. A light flickered through the trees. Headlights. Sweeping. Bo Slater's truck. That guttural diesel groan. The one that sounded like it hated the road. Gordon ducked, doused the lamp. The light passed, slow, like a searcher unsure of what he was hunting. When it faded, Gordon exhaled. Back to work. The creature moved then, just a slight adjustment of the leg, the trapped one, enough to ease pressure, enough to say, "I'm helping." The bar slipped the spring free. The trap snapped open with a metallic gasp. The leg tensed, but there was no wild pull, no retreat. Gordon reached for the burlap and wrapped it low, just above the wound. He poured a trickle of water, then pressed the herbs in slow. The creature stayed still, breathing hard now, shivering. No cry. Gordon backed away when it was done. He gathered the rest of the supplies, but left the extra cloth, the good strip, on the stone nearby. A small gesture. Not a thank you, not an invitation. Just something to say. "You might need this too." The wind picked up as he turned to leave. Cold and clean. The kind that rattles pine needles loose. He didn't look back until he'd reached the switchback. When he did, the clearing was empty. The reeds moved. The stone sat bare. But the trap, twisted, half-buried and mean, was still there. And he knew somehow it wouldn't be the last one. Not in these woods. And not with Bo Slater still thinking this place belonged to him. Gordon climbed higher, one hand on his ribs where the cold found a soft place. The forest below faded into mist, then dark. But something had changed. He didn't know the name for it, but it sat in his chest like a borrowed heartbeat. Not fear, not relief. Something older. Something shared. He would sleep light that night. Not from worry, but from knowing something remembered him and waited. Not with expectation, just with patience. The sky peeled open in strips of lavender and bruised gray as Gordon Hale made his way back toward the reeds near Sable Fork. The cold had crept deeper now, and the wind bit sharper through the wool of his jacket. Each footstep in the mud gave a slow, deliberate sound. And behind it all, the creek hummed low like it knew what had happened here wasn't finished yet. He carried what he could. Not much. A length of burlap, coiled and damp. The old oil lamp, the one that had lit his father's workbench years before. A pouch of dried herbs wrapped in wax paper. Martha's doing, still sharp with pine and sage. No weapons, no rope. Just what you'd carry if you planned to stay only as long as your nerves held. The forest made room for him, not out of welcome but out of watchfulness. The moss was darker now, slick from hail that had come out of nowhere, leaving the leaves dappled and heavy. His hands were already numbing by the time he reached the bottom of the slope. He kept the lamp low, shielding the flame with one palm. He didn't want to startle anything. Or anyone. The clearing hadn't changed much. The trap sat empty now, its steel teeth pried wide, bent slightly from where the tension had snapped. The burlap he'd left had been moved, maybe nudged by wind, maybe not. The creature, whatever it was still there. Slouched low against a stone, its weight leaning just enough to show pain but not defeat. It hadn't fled, hadn't lashed out. That meant something. He placed the lamp down behind a patch of ferns, letting the glow spread slow like honey. He kept his voice buried. Nothing needed saying out loud. Instead, he moved in careful inches, crouched again beside the metal, and examined what damage had been done. The gash along the shin was clean, but deep. Not fresh anymore, but not old enough to ignore. Dried blood and fresh mud shared space across the fur. And under it, the muscle twitched like it didn't trust peace. He opened the pouch. The scent lifted immediately. Sharp, warm, bitter. He worked quickly, tearing the burlap into strips, dipping them in water from his canteen, then pressing them into the mixture of crushed leaves and root slivers. He didn't ask permission. He didn't have to. The creature's eyes never left him, but it didn't move. Not when he reached out, not when he wrapped the leg. The rain started again, not in drops, but in needles. Tiny bits of ice that rattled against the leaves and roofed the woods in a steady hush. It masked the sound of his breathing. It masked everything. Then, headlights, cutting through the trees, slicing shadows into ribbons. Gordon's heart locked up. That sound, low gears, slow roll, gravel crunching under tires, was familiar. Bo Slater. Back earlier than he should have been. Gordon snuffed the lamp with one practiced pinch and dropped low. He could hear the truck idling past the bend, lingering too long. The glow swept through the trees like a question with no patience. He didn't breathe. Neither did the creature. Then the sound moved on, grinding its way toward the logging road. The moment it was gone, the forest seemed to exhale. Gordon lit the lamp again, just enough to see his hands. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the cold that had crawled up his sleeves. He turned back to the work. The herbs went in clean, folded under the cloth like old church rituals. He tied the wrap loose but firm, like Martha had taught him. Tight enough to bind, not enough to bite. The creature shifted only once, lifting its leg just slightly so Gordon could finish the wrap. A silent offer of trust. When it was done, Gordon sat back on his heels. His knees ached. He could feel the rain working its way through his jacket. He didn't ask for gratitude. He didn't need it. But there was a moment, just a breath's width long, where the creature's gaze met his, steady and without fear, and something passed between them. Not words, not promise, just a kind of shared silence. The kind you only get after holding your breath through something that could have broken you both. He set the rest of the burlap on the flat rock beside them. A few clean cloths, the herbs he hadn't used yet. No note, no instruction. Just left it there like someone might leave a coat on a stranger's porch during a cold night. Then he stood, wiping his hands against his jeans, and turned back toward the slope. His joints fought him on every step, but he didn't rush. There was nothing to run from now. Not in that moment. Behind him, he heard the slow movement of weight, the sound of something alive adjusting itself gently. Not hiding, just healing. Back at the cabin, the wood stove fought the cold with every flicker it could muster. Gordon sat by the window, watching the rain drip from the roof's edge. His hands still smelled of pine and iron. He didn't sleep right away. He didn't really sleep at all. Just watched the dark thicken around the trees until it was morning again. The next day, the trap was gone. Just a patch of churned mud and some crushed reeds where it had once bitten. The burlap was gone too. Only thing left was a faint track pressed into the wet earth. Not deep. Just enough to know it had walked. Not limped. He didn't tell anyone. There were things you told, and then there were things you didn't. Later that week, while clearing a path near the North Trail, he found a shape placed neatly atop a stone shelf by the creek. A bundle of dried switchgrass, tied with a strip of thin bark. Not decoration, not trash, just placed. Like someone had wanted it found, but not announced. He left it where it was, but when he came back the next day, it was gone. In its place, a new one. He never saw it delivered. Never saw who took the old one away. It just changed, quietly, like the forest adjusting itself around something new. That evening, he lit the stove early. The cold had crept deeper, and his fingers were slow. He boiled water. Let the steam fill the cabin, soften the air. Outside, the sky hung heavy, clouds dipping so low they kissed the tops of the trees. The hush of the woods pressed against the walls like someone listening from just beyond the porch. And then, in the middle of that stillness, came the soft sound of mud. He stepped to the door, opened it part way. There were prints, 2 wide palm shapes, pressed into the wet boards of his porch. Not frantic, not clawed, just impressions. Large, human-shaped, but not human-sized. As if someone had leaned there briefly, just enough to say, "I was here." He didn't touch them. Just stood, hand on the doorframe, until the cold convinced him to go back inside. That night he didn't lock the door. Didn't need to. By morning the prints were gone. but the space they left stayed with him. Down at the creek, the reeds whispered like old women sharing gossip. Somewhere far off, a hawk circled above the ridgeline. He stood on the bank and listened to nothing for a long time. Let the quiet settle on him the way snow might settle on a fence post. Soft, inevitable, undemanding. He thought about the creature, how it hadn't begged, hadn't bristled, just waited, just let itself be seen, and how he had answered. Not with speeches, just with hands that did the work and a heart that didn't shut. It wasn't a deal, it wasn't a debt, but it was something. And even now, days later, he could feel it. That strange tether, stretched thin through trees and fog. Not tight, not pulling, just present. Like the forest had memorized him. Not just his face, but his choice. He didn't tell Martha. Didn't tell anyone. But the next time he walked past her porch, he paused long enough to pick up another pouch of herbs she left hanging by the door. No label, no price. Just there, just waiting. Like someone else had been seen once too, and had learned what to leave behind. The wind picked up, rustling the trees in a slow, deep rhythm. He stood a while longer, boots sinking slightly in the wet soil, before heading back up the hill. His lantern flickered with every step, but he didn't look behind him. Not yet, because the woods were still watching, and he wanted to make sure they remembered what mercy looked like. The morning fog held tight to the tree line like breath not yet exhaled. Sable Fork was quiet, heavy with the kind of stillness that comes after rain and before anyone's ready to move again. Gordon Hale had been up since before first light, fixing the latch on the woodshed that had warped in the damp, but his hands hadn't warmed. He hadn't lit the stove yet. Something in him said the day would bring its own heat, or trouble. The knock came just after 7, not the clumsy thud of a stranger or the hurried knock of a neighbor. 3 precise raps. Clear, official. He opened the door slowly, shoulders already stiff. Deputy Colt Anders stood on the porch, hat in hand, his boots caked with the kind of clay mud that didn't let go easy. 28, tall, and too polite for the kind of job that often asked you to be something harder. He nodded once, eyes scanning past Gordon into the dim hallway like he expected to see more than shadows and books. "Mornin', Mr. Hale. Got a few minutes?" Gordon didn't answer right away, just stepped back and let the door swing wider. Colt crossed the threshold with care, wiping his boots on the mat out of habit. He carried a clipboard tucked under one arm, but didn't look at it. He stood near the coat rack, waiting. "Got a call," he started, voice low. "From Bo Slater. Said someone dismantled one of his traps down by the creek. Claims it was tampered with. Looked like someone used a pry bar." Gordon leaned against the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. "Plenty of folks use that trail," he said. "Could have been hikers." "Could have," Colt agreed. "Only Bo says there were prints. Boot tread matched what he saw in town. Said they looked a lot like yours." There was no accusation in his tone, but the space between the words left room for one. Gordon exhaled slow. "I cleared a path. Some saplings were overgrown. I was just making it safe for walkers. Didn't touch his traps. Don't even know where he sets them." A half-truth, not a lie, but not what happened. Colt nodded again, eyes steady. "I'm not here to file anything, Mr. Hale. Just checking in. If there's something you saw out there, anything out of place, you can let me know. Off the record." Gordon didn't answer. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but thick with something neither man wanted to stir. After a moment, Colt sighed and shifted his weight. "All right. Well, if you hear anything strange, you know where to find me." Gordon watched him go. The door clicked shut. The fog hadn't lifted. In fact, it looked thicker now. But it wasn't the weather that set his neck on edge. It was what waited in the quiet after a truth had been folded in half. He walked back to the table, hands restless. There was mud on the porch, but not from Colt. 2 prints, large, palms, not boots, pressed firm into the boards like someone had leaned there to steady themselves. Not claw marks, not animal, not human, not quite. He crouched down, touched the edge of one. It was dry now, flaked off like old leather. Nothing else nearby. No scratch on the door, no broken latch, just presence. A mark that didn't demand attention but earned it anyway. That night, he didn't light the lamp. Let the fire burn low and watched the glow fade across the floorboards. Around midnight, he heard movement outside. Soft, heavy, circling the cabin, never approaching the door, like someone pacing, making sure the perimeter held. A kind of vigil, not haunting, watching. He didn't rise, just listened, breathing slow, the way you do when a memory is being written. By dawn, it was gone. No noise, no prints this time. Only a feeling, the kind that lingers in the corners even after you open all the windows. Later that morning, he walked down toward the creek. The boulder where he'd left the herbs was bare. The wrapping cloth, too, gone. In their place, something new. A small bundle of switchgrass, tied clean, tight, laid neatly on the rock like an offering or a reply. He picked it up gently. The stalks were still damp with dew, fresh, recent. He didn't speak. There was no one to hear it anyway. Martha Lowell showed up just after noon, carrying a jar of steeped roots and some dried bark wrapped in wax paper. She didn't knock. She never did. Just stepped in like she had every right, because she always had. She sniffed once, looked around. "You been keeping the stove cold?" she asked, not waiting for a reply. "Air in here's too thick." He shrugged. Didn't feel like burning wood for no reason. She set the jar down on the table, eyes narrowing slightly. "Something been on your porch." He didn't deny it, just glanced out the window. The woods were still, but they had a posture now. A kind of listening, like the trees were leaning closer than usual. "Something stood there," she continued. "Big, too heavy for a man, but no aggression, just waiting. You feel that?" He nodded. She didn't press, just unwrapped a small bundle from her bag and handed it to him. "Camphor and sage, if you need to clean a wound or the air, just in case." Gordon watched her pack her things. She paused at the door. "You find more traps out there," she said. "Ones with springbacks or double rows. Don't keep it to yourself. Bo's not just reckless. He's proud. Pride like that don't learn from quiet." He knew she was right, but he also knew what the woods had asked of him. Not to fix it, not to fight. Just to see and remember. That evening, he found himself walking back toward the creek again. Not out of duty, just a pull. The kind of instinct you stop questioning when it keeps proving itself right. At the edge of the trail, where the pines bent over the footpath, he saw something that stopped him cold. 3 tracks, pressed into the mud, not leading in, not leading out. Just standing there, side by side. The first, large and flat. The second, smaller, his own from the day before. The third, even larger, deeper than the others, like someone twice his weight had paused to stand where he had stood. He crouched, studying them. Each had clarity, detail, no sign of struggle, just patience. Someone had come and waited, then gone. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those prints, not as warnings, but as company. Just before dawn, he rose and stepped outside. The air was sharp. The fog had lifted. Stars still blinked in the thinning dark. On the porch, where the handprints had been, there was now a single item placed with care. A stone. Round. Flat. The kind you'd find at the creek bottom. But it had been scrubbed clean. Too clean. The surface worn smooth, edges softened like it had been handled again and again. He picked it up. Warm. Somehow still warm. He stood there a long time, stone in hand, until the sun burned the horizon pale and the cold began to let go. He didn't know what would come next, what shape the days might take. But he knew this. Whatever lived out there, whatever had endured Bo's steel and the silence of years, had made a choice. Not to flee, not to lash out, but to answer. And for now, that was enough. Enough to keep walking the same trail. Enough to keep the fire low and the door unlocked. Enough to trust that sometimes the forest remembered who listened and didn't forget who knelt first. The wind had changed overnight, curling through the pine canopy like it was dragging something older with it. Gordon Hale felt it before he heard it. Pressure in his ribs, a warning threaded through the morning chill. Sable Fork didn't like to be rushed. The forest had a rhythm of its own, and when it shifted, the smart ones noticed. This morning, it wasn't the birds that woke him, but silence, the kind that hangs just long enough to make a man listen harder. He stepped out onto the porch, coffee steaming in his palm, and squinted toward the ridgeline. The trees leaned differently today, their shoulders stiff with cold and something else. He could feel it in the mud, too, how it pulled at his boots like it wanted him to stay put. But something had moved during the night. He knew the signs now, subtle things. A branch nudged aside, a rock placed back where it hadn't been. The forest was tidying up, not for him, for itself. Down by the creek, where Bo Slater had set his last few traps, the ground bore new scars. Gordon walked slow, eyes low. Bo didn't learn the first time, or the second. The man came from a long line of takers, those who saw land as leverage, not kin. And now he was back at it, hauling in new steel, digging pits, wedging deadfall spikes into gullies that no game passed through naturally. It wasn't hunting. It was declaring war on a place that wouldn't fight back. But something had shifted. That morning, Bo's voice cracked through the stillness like a crowbar splitting ice. He was shouting, cussing. Metal clanged. Gordon didn't need to see it to know what had happened. The woods had rejected him. One of his rigs, probably the one staked too close to the lichen-slick slope, had given out. Maybe the weight of rain had collapsed it. Maybe a root snapped. Maybe nothing at all. But the result was the same. Bo was wet, bruised, and down one rifle. His shoulder had caught the edge of a fallen post, and his boot had sunk into a pocket of creek mud so deep he'd left it behind when he limped out barefoot. No one else saw it. But Gordon did. He found the boot hours later, wedged into a notch between two stones, filled to the brim with black water and something else. Something sour and metallic, like anger swallowed back. He didn't return it. Instead, he walked the perimeter Bo had tried to claim. And what he saw there chilled him more than the weather. Each trap that had been laid out, double snare, triple barbed, pressure triggered, was either bent inward or broken clean. Not cut, not stolen. Just undone. Like the land itself had refused the offering. No footprints, no drag marks. Only the traps, gathered in a pile beneath a bent spruce, mangled and half buried in earth as if returned in warning. That night back in town, Martha Lowell met Colt Anders outside the general store. She carried a basket full of ginger root and oilskin-wrapped leaves, but her voice was heavy when she spoke. "You ever think about the fire?" she asked him. Quiet, like she didn't want the storefront windows to overhear. Colt blinked. "Which one?" "You know the one." He did. Summer of '99, the East Ridge blaze. Back when he was barely 20, still more pride than sense, and just green enough to believe wind followed orders. He'd lit a backburn too fast, too wide, thought he could control it. It jumped a line, took half the old growth on timber span before the rains came. "I think about it more than I want to," he admitted. "Then you understand," she said, eyes fixed on a knot in the wooden sidewalk. "The forest doesn't forget, but it forgives if we let it. Bo's pushing. The woods are pushing back." He didn't argue, just nodded and made a quiet note to hike the perimeter himself in the morning. Not with a badge, just with his boots and a mind open to whatever waited. That evening the wind returned. It brought with it the smell of rust and moss, the sound of branches settling, and something quieter still, a kind of order being restored. Not by man, not by machine, just by patience and time. Gordon walked the trail before dusk, the way he always did. Lantern unlit, coat buttoned up against the cold. He paused near the north bend, where the old cedar split into a V, and saw it, resting on the stone ledge like it had been placed with careful hands. A piece of a trap, the same kind Bo used, crushed flat, edges curled inward like petals folding. No signs of struggle, no noise, just there, left like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one wanted to write. He didn't touch it. Didn't have to. The message was clear. By the time he made it home, the sky had darkened to ash and plum. The stove hissed in the corner. He poured water into the kettle, let it moan to a boil, and sat with his back to the wall, watching the fog roll over the windows like slow breath. The town would talk eventually. Some already had. Whispers moving through diners and feed stores. Stories of shadows in the tree line, of shapes too large to be deer, too upright to be bear. Some said it was nonsense. Others said it was old stories come back to walk the dirt roads again. But Gordon didn't need tales. He had memory. And that memory didn't come with sharp teeth or red eyes. It came with weight, with silence, with kindness wrapped in stillness. He thought of the traps, not the ones he'd seen, but the ones he hadn't. How many had been dismantled without anyone noticing? How many times something large had stepped around a trigger or reached down to snap a spring in half just to make sure no foot, hoof, or paw would ever find it? The forest wasn't angry. It was cleaning house. And people like Bo, those who couldn't read the signs, who kept hammering steel into soft ground, were being asked, slowly and without drama, to leave. And people like Gordon, those who listened, who knelt once and meant it, were being watched. Not judged, just remembered. He didn't sleep long that night. Around 3, he stepped outside, mug in hand, breath curling in front of him. The stars had burned off most of the cloud cover, leaving the sky raw and clean. The trees didn't move, but something did. Just past the fence line. A flicker, a shadow, a reminder. He walked to the edge of the porch and stood there, waiting. No flashlight, no weapon, just the warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with coffee. And then he saw it. A figure, too tall, too still, framed between the trees like a doorway only the woods knew how to open. It didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. And when he nodded, once, slow, honest, it turned. Not to run, just to vanish, the way fog does when the sun finally rises. And that's when Gordon understood. The forest had made its choice, and now it was watching to see if people would make theirs. Under the pale breath of October, the forest had gone still again. Not dead, just listening. The air carried the sharp scent of turned earth and decaying leaves, the kind that pulled a memory out of your chest before you knew it was hiding there. Gordon Hale felt it in his teeth when he stepped out that morning. The change. Wind had swung east overnight, pushing the smell of pine deeper into the hollows, thickening the fog that hung low over Sable Fork like a second skin. There'd be frost by sundown. And something else, something already moving. At the edge of town, 9-year-old Tessa Bloom darted barefoot through the back pasture of her family's small homestead, her red paper kite skipping like a heartbeat across the wind. Her brothers were inside, tangled in some cartoon rerun. Her mother was canning green beans with the kitchen windows fogged up tight. Her father had gone to feed the goats before the frost hit. No one noticed when she stepped past the last fence post, chasing that stubborn kite as it snagged once, twice, then slipped free and spun toward the tree line. She hesitated at the boundary, just long enough to hear her name on the wind. But then the tail of the kite danced again, and she ran. The edge of the forest was where the light changed first. It didn't dim, it thickened. Shadows lay wider between the trunks. The ground turned soft with wet needles and broken twigs. Tessa knew not to go far, but the kite had drifted just a little more. over one rise, then down behind a low wall of blackberry bramble. She stepped around it, didn't realize, until the air shifted and the sun blinked out behind a stretch of dark cloud, that she'd gone too far. The kite was gone, and the woods weren't quiet anymore. Wind moved in slow waves, brushing against the canopy, pushing down the smell of lichen and something older. The dirt beneath her shoes squished like sponge. She turned to find the trail back, and there wasn't one. Just brush, and white fog, and the long hush of something unseen exhaling. At the Bloom house, the first shout went out when the goat pen was still open and the dog wasn't barking. Tessa's mother ran to the edge of the yard with her apron still on. Her father came next, boots unlaced, face pale. They hollered her name toward the trees, over and over, but there was no answer. Just the sound of a kite stuck somewhere in the bramble, and the edge of night already crawling up the hills. The call reached Gordon's cabin after 5. He heard it in Martha Lowell's voice first, through the static of her old landline. Short words, clipped, not panic, but close. He didn't ask questions, just grabbed his coat, the old lantern, and his hiking stick. Didn't bother with a flashlight. The creek would guide him. The trees took him in like they'd been waiting. His feet found the slope behind his cabin without thought. Every step hit soft, quiet. He moved without hurry, but with purpose. The same kind he'd carried weeks ago when he first saw that trap. When he first saw the thing inside it. Some memories sit behind your ribs like a second heartbeat, and his was beating faster now. Halfway down the ridge, he spotted the first mark, small, soft print, dampened at the edges, heading deeper into the thicket. Child size, the tread light but spaced wide like she'd been running or skipping, maybe chasing something, or being chased. He followed. Not far beyond that, he found a second trail. Faint, but deliberate. Longer strides, heavier, deep set, parallel to hers, just off to the side. It had walked with her, not behind, not in front, and not over her tracks. It had made space for her. He paused, crouched low, fingers brushing the damp ground. It wasn't protection, not the way a grown-up shields a child with arms. This was different, guided, like someone clearing a path not with hands, but with presence, keeping her steps firm where the mud might otherwise swallow them. At the crook of a cedar tree, he found a small pouch, oil-stained canvas, recognizable in an instant, Martha's. She used them to carry herbs, for fevers, wounds, root aches. She'd dropped this one a year back on a search call for a missing hiker, someone they found safe the next day, curled in a hollow log with a sprig of yarrow by their side. Gordon picked it up. Still smelled like lavender and rain-soaked bark. Hadn't been there long. The forest curved inward from that point, the undergrowth thicker, the slope trickier. He used the creek's voice again, following the rhythm of it down into a stretch of dry gulch where the air turned cooler. His light caught something small just ahead. A set of sticks, snapped and arranged, 3 pointing west, 1 bent slightly downward. A signal, clumsy, childlike, or not. He didn't smile, but he felt something lift in his chest. Someone had helped her. At the base of the ridge, where the rock wall opened into a shallow cut in the hillside, he found it. A narrow passage partially concealed by brush, with broken pine needles pressed flat at the opening. Inside, the air hung dry, warm from the trapped breath of the earth. And in the dim near the back wall, a girl, curled in her coat, arms wrapped tight around herself. Her boots were soaked through, her hands stained with dirt. But she was breathing, eyes closed, head resting against the stone. He stepped in slow, careful not to startle her. But she didn't stir. She wasn't alone. Standing at the mouth of the cave, not 10 feet away from where the wind cut sharp against the entrance, a figure waited. Tall, massive, still. No sound, no shift of weight, just presence. Gordon didn't move closer. He didn't need to. The creature's shoulders blocked most of the cold wind that curled through the trees. Its arms hung loose at its sides. One foot slightly turned, like it had been standing there a long while. Not tense, not aggressive, just there. Protecting. He set the lantern down near the girl, pulled the canteen from his bag, and soaked a cloth. Wiped gently at the dirt around her mouth, pressed a little warmth back into her fingers, then reached for his pouch, the one with the last of Martha's herbs, and left it on the stone near the creature's foot. The reaction was barely perceptible. A shift of weight. One long toe nudging the pouch closer toward the girl. Acknowledgement. Not a thank you. A choice. Far off he heard dogs. First a distant bark, then the rise and fall of voices. The search team was closing in, but the wind had shifted, and the scent trail would lead them wrong. He turned, made his way back to the entrance, and stepped outside. Colt Anders stood a few yards up, flashlight in hand, coat soaked through from the waist down. You found her? Gordon nodded once. She okay? She will be. Colt's eyes narrowed toward the cave. Anything else? Gordon looked back at the dark. No, he said quiet. Just luck. Together they brought the girl out as gently as they could. She woke halfway through the walk, mumbled something about her kite, then whispered, "He didn't let the wind in." Neither man asked who she meant. They didn't have to. As they reached the trailhead, Gordon paused. Behind him, the wind shifted again. Leaves rustled, branches swayed. But nothing emerged. He placed his hand on his chest, open, still, and bowed his head once, not in prayer, but in respect. The child was safe, and the forest had kept its promise, not in words, but in presence. And somewhere deep in the hush between trees, a shape faded back into shadow, leaving only the echo of patience behind. The mouth of the cave held the cold like a memory too old to thaw. Dry leaves clung to the rocks outside, and inside, the air pulsed with the kind of silence only shared by things that knew how to wait. Tessa Bloom slept with her cheek pressed to the stone wall, her breath slow and even now, but still edged in the soft whistle of a throat too young for all this quiet. Her coat was damp from the night fog, her fingers curled into the fabric like she knew even in dreams to hold tight to what was warm. Outside the cave, the wind howled once, then dropped, cut short by the body standing in its path. The figure hadn't moved much. It had stood like that for hours, heavy, quiet, taking the brunt of the weather and the weight of whatever instinct had placed it there. Gordon had seen plenty of wild in his years. Enough bears, enough storms, enough moments where the back of your neck tells you when to duck and when to stand your ground. But this was not wild. It was something older, something that chose to guard without being asked. He knelt beside Tessa again, her lips cracked from the cold, forehead damp with the remnants of adrenaline and fear. He unwrapped the small bundle of clean bandage from his coat and reached into the pouch of leaves Martha had given him weeks ago. Dried comfrey, a little crushed yarrow, crumbled into warm water and pressed into cloth. It made a kind of healing tea that skin recognized before the mind did. He didn't ask permission, just dabbed gently at the streak of mud across her brow and whispered a breathless comfort he couldn't remember learning. The creature shifted, not toward him, toward her. Its foot, massive, wide, rough like cedar bark, lifted and nudged something closer. The pouch Gordon had set down minutes earlier, not kicked, not pushed, just delivered. A quiet instruction passed without word. This is for her. Gordon didn't look up. He didn't need to. The meaning was clear, and the trust had already been shared, way back when steel had bitten into flesh and no one ran from the sound of it. Outside, the sound of dogs broke through again, distant at first, then closer. A yelp, a command. The trail team was sweeping wide, probably losing the scent in this as wind. Gordon moved to the mouth of the cave and caught sight of a flicker, lamplight bouncing between trunks. Colt Anders, steady, smart. and kind enough to trust Gordon's eyes even when his own couldn't explain what they were seeing. Gordon stepped halfway out, raised a hand. "She's in here," he called. "Safe." Colt's breath came fast as he reached the entrance, boots wet from the creek run. "Thank Christ," he muttered, scanning Gordon's face, then ducking low to peer into the hollow. He saw the girl first, then the shape behind her. He froze, not out of fear, but calculation. Gordon touched his sleeve. "Don't speak," he said. "Just watch." Colt nodded once, noticed the stance of the figure, the way it didn't turn or flex or pace, just stood there like a windbreak made of intention. Gordon stepped back into the cave, knelt beside Tessa, and gently eased her upright. She blinked, dazed, head lolling toward his shoulder. "It's okay," he whispered. "We're taking you home." Her voice, when it came, was no louder than wind in tall grass. "He said the night would bite if I moved, so he stood still." Gordon swallowed hard. Colt helped lift her, cradling her carefully like she might wake up fully if handled wrong. At the mouth of the cave, Gordon paused, looked back. The creature hadn't moved, hadn't asked for anything. Gordon pressed his hand to his own chest. Open palm. Honest gesture. Not a goodbye? A promise. No need to say more. They walked slow. The lantern cast a soft yellow path through the bramble. Gordon led the way, Colt behind, whispering comforts into Tessa's hair. Halfway down the slope, the dogs barked again, closer this time, and the voices of men and women echoed up the hollow. The light from search lamps swept past the trees and into the gully, catching glimpses of boots, orange jackets, concern. Nobody asked what had happened. Not then. Not out loud. Back at the ranger station, Tessa was wrapped in flannel and cocoa and the warmth of people who hadn't dared hope. Her father wept without noise. Her mother clung to her like memory does to grief. And the whole time, Tessa smiled. Not wide, not dramatic. Just the smile of someone who had been carried through the dark by something without a name. Later, as Gordon sat near the fire with Colt, the two men didn't speak for a long while. Colt finally cleared his throat. "You gonna file a report?" Gordon shook his head. "No need, nothing to report." Colt sipped from his mug, nodded slow. "Thought you'd say that." And for a long time, that was enough. Until the next morning, when Gordon returned to the cave, just to check, just to know, he found it empty. The pouch of herbs gone, the leaves cleared, the ground smoothed. But right at the mouth, placed gently on a stone shelf like a bookend to memory, sat the smallest thing he didn't expect. One long thread of black hair, twined into a braid of switchgrass. Not a trophy, a gesture. And when Gordon turned to leave, he looked back only once. The trees didn't move. The cave didn't breathe. But the wind curled around his ear and carried a hush he could almost understand. He'd been trusted. And trust, once given, doesn't vanish. It walks the woods with you, even when you think you're alone. The rumors started like they always do in a small town, soft, persistent, and dressed in borrowed truth. Someone at the feed store swore they saw a shape move behind the water tower just after dusk. Someone else said it wasn't a bear, because no bear walks that straight or pauses to look back. An old man outside the diner, eyes glassy from years of whiskey and stories no one asked for, claimed the thing stood taller than his trailer and had eyes like copper left in fire. His coffee had gone cold while he spoke. No one touched it. But even those who laughed didn't laugh as loud as they used to. Sable Fork had always held its quiet with both hands. A town small enough for doors to stay unlocked, but old enough to know when something bigger than a person had passed by. And now, that hush hung thick in the spaces between conversation. Not fear, not yet, but caution. Like a creek gone still before the storm. At the edge of it all, Gordon Hale kept his mouth shut. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he understood the weight of silence. The truth, he knew, wasn't a thing to be shouted down Main Street. It was something you carried, Something you placed, careful and clean, like a stone on a riverbank. He'd been watched by something that did not ask for thanks. That had taken the child's safety as its own responsibility. And he'd felt, bone deep, that the forest was shifting, not against them, but in front of them. Like a curtain drawn slowly over something sacred. He wasn't the only one who noticed. Martha Lowell had started making more rounds. Not the kind you log. The kind passed down. She'd stop by homes with herbal pouches tucked in the folds of her coat, small bundles of thyme and pine needles to hang above doorways. For the cough, she'd say. But her eyes told more. She spent longer outside barns, listened harder at the edge of orchards. And sometimes, if the light hit her right, you could see the same weight in her shoulders that Gordon carried now. It was Colt Anders who made the first real move. He called it a precaution. But when he hammered the first signpost into the soil near the west trailhead, the metal groaned like it didn't want to stay. 3 words, carved rough into oak and nailed in place. No traps here. People noticed. Some rolled their eyes, muttered about government overreach. Others nodded quietly, like it was a decision they'd already made in their own hearts but hadn't found the words for. And the kids, the ones still young enough to feel the world instead of thinking it, cheered when they heard the latching sound of the final post going in. "Safer now," one boy whispered to his sister. And for a while it was. Bo Slater got called into the station the following week. No charges, just a conversation. He walked in with his jaw tight and his boots muddy, the kind of mud that sticks with a grudge. Walked out with a folded citation and a court date for improper snaring on state-protected land. No one clapped, no one shouted. But as he passed the hardware store on his way home, a woman stepped off the curb and didn't move aside. She looked him dead in the eye, said nothing. That silence was louder than anything she could have said. In the days that followed, something began to change. It wasn't sudden. No loud signs or broken windows. Just adjustments. The livestock pens stayed unbothered. Hens stopped spooking at night. Dogs, once restless, curled deeper into sleep. The woods, once tense at the edges, relaxed. Not entirely, but enough that you could feel it in your lungs. And then came the bundles. One by one they showed up. Not at every doorstep. Not all at once, but always in the same quiet way. A sprig of switchgrass, a feather tucked into twine, a polished stone laid in the center, arranged with the kind of care that meant someone knew exactly what each piece meant, even if the receiver didn't. Martha found the first one outside her shed, right on the windowsill where the sun hit around noon. Gordon found his resting on the flat stump where he used to chop kindling, still damp from morning dew, but warm as if someone had cupped it in their palm before laying it down. Others followed. A man who once tried to fence off part of the stream found a coiled vine, tied in a circle, with 2 pine cones placed at the center like eyes. He took down the fence the same day. No threats, no tracks, no shadows waiting in the trees. Just these offerings, or reminders, as if the forest itself was placing memory in the hands of those who had forgotten. But not everyone saw them that way. One night a teenager threw his bundle into the creek. Laughed about it at school the next day. Said it was weird junk, probably some art project or backwoods prank. 3 days later, the boy's dog wouldn't step outside at night. Wouldn't bark. Wouldn't eat until the boy placed the stones back on his porch, still wet from the riverbed. After that, the joke stopped. Word traveled slow but steady. Not fear-driven, not hysterical. Just shaped by a new kind of reverence. One evening, just before the sun dipped behind the ridge, Gordon walked the trail near the creek bend, the same path where the trap had once snapped shut around a creature who refused to cry out. He stopped at the flat rock where he'd once left a pouch of healing herbs and found it again changed. 3 objects, placed carefully, aligned. A crushed piece of iron, rusted at the hinge, remnant of a trap long gone. A single deer hair, still smooth, soft at the base, and a stone, pale, chalky, worn down flat like it had been rolled for years across stream beds and underfoot paths. No note, no voice in the trees, just presence. He stood there a long time. The air around him wasn't cold, but it hummed with memory, of pain, of mercy, of the long, slow act of returning. As the last light slipped into the trees, Gordon took one breath, deep and slow, and walked back the way he came. No longer just a man who'd seen something once, but someone who had been changed by what was willing to stay unseen. Behind him, the forest exhaled, not loud, not final, but enough. And somewhere between the wind and the hush, between memory and movement, a promise was settling into place. Not written, not spoken, but lived, and it would stay there, just beneath the bark and above the roots, until someone else came along who needed to be reminded that kindness, even when quiet, leaves a mark. By early spring, the ice on Sable Fork had given up its hold. The water no longer crept. It ran. Fast, clear, humming over the rocks like a song remembered. It carried with it the smell of new bark and wet stone, and the quiet memory of all that had gone still in winter. Gordon Hale stood at the edge of the creek, where the current curled hard around the bend, and watched the last patches of frost sink into the soil. His breath fogged soft in the morning chill. In his hand, a hammer. At his feet, a bundle of thick wooden slats, nails tucked into a tin can, twine coiled in loops like sleeping snakes. He bent to his work slowly, not out of age, but care. The old footbridge had buckled sometime in February. One too many cold snaps, one too many logs rushing down from upstream, hitting the struts just right. It was still crossable, if you were light and lucky, but it wobbled under weight. The kind of wobble that made children nervous and mothers say no. So Gordon came down with his hammer and his patience, and did what needed doing. Rebuilt, not for praise, but because a bridge should hold. Behind him, the trees watched like they always had. Shoulders hunched in their wet bark, breath low and green. Every few minutes, a bird called out, not in warning, just as if to remind the air it was alive again. On the opposite bank, Martha Lowell knelt in the dirt with a canvas sack at her side, pressing thin shoots of wild ginger into the soil. The new row would take root if the frost stayed gone. She spoke to the ground while she worked, not loud, just enough for the plants to feel welcomed. Children from the town had wandered by earlier, skipping stones and pointing at the bridge. One of them asked if it would be finished by Sunday. "If it doesn't rain hard again," Gordon said. The kid grinned. "Mama says it'll last longer if you build it." He didn't answer, just tipped his hat. By noon, he had 2 boards down, secured tight. The water lapped gently underneath, steady, unbothered. Each swing of the hammer echoed into the trees like a heartbeat made of wood and will. That night the wind shifted, not with cold, with meaning. It swept up from the gorge and curled through town, rattling the chimes on porches and knocking loose shutters that had held tight all winter. It didn't howl. It asked. The kind of wind that feels like something checking in. Gordon didn't sleep much. At dawn, he stepped outside, coffee already cooling in his hand, and saw what waited by the bridge. Set right in the middle on the first new plank was a piece of twisted iron, bent, rusted, the hinge crushed flat. It looked like a trap or what was left of one, but it wasn't thrown or dumped. It had been placed, deliberate, clean. Next to it sat a smooth pebble, small, white, shaped like a broken tooth, and a twig, snapped and laid across the top like a marker. He picked them up without a word. Didn't look around, didn't need to. Later that day, he buried the iron under the roots of the cedar tree behind his house. Not out of fear, out of understanding. He didn't mention it to Colt when they met in town later, discussing water permits and a new fire ring someone had set too close to the tree line. But the deputy looked at him long enough to know something had been said, even if no words came with it. That week, a new sign went up at the trailhead. Not a regulation board, just hand-painted pine nailed into a clean post. "No Snares Community Watershed. Respect the path." No name signed. Didn't need one. People stopped asking questions by then. They'd seen too many signs. The bundles, the rearranged rocks, the chicken coop door that used to swing in the wind but now always clicked shut just before dusk, like someone large had brushed it on their way past. And one night, a man who'd once argued hardest about my land, my rules, woke up to find every trap in his shed placed on his porch, cleaned, unset, aligned in rows like bones waiting to be buried. He sold the shed a week later. Some things don't need enforcement, just memory. Gordon kept walking the creek trail most evenings, not because he expected to find anything, but because you walk where the silence feels right. One Saturday, he stopped at the bridge again, checked the nails, adjusted the twine that held the railings firm. A girl's ribbon, red, cloth torn at the edges, was tied around one post. Someone had left it in thanks, or maybe as a promise. Either way, he didn't touch it. And then he heard it. Not close, not loud, but there. A footstep. Heavy, deliberate. He didn't turn, just let his breath settle, kept his hand resting on the rail. For a long time, nothing moved. And then, from somewhere just past the tree line, a shift, a breath, the feeling of something assessing. Not for threat, for strength. He stepped back from the bridge, slow. And in the quiet that followed, the trees stayed still, but not empty. The world held its breath. The next morning, children found a second bridge plank, new, unweathered, laid carefully on the grass by the trail. Still dry, though it had rained all night. No one knew who brought it. Gordon did. He used it the same day. No questions. Just gratitude hammered into place. By mid-April, the town had settled into something that felt steadier than before. Not louder, just more aware. People left apples near the base of certain trees. Others stopped hunting on weekends. Not because anyone told them not to, but because the woods had earned a different kind of respect. Not out of fear, out of knowing something larger was watching, and that it only stepped forward when it had to. That's what stayed with Gordon most. Not the tracks. Not the hair, not even the face he barely glimpsed through fog that one night in early winter. It was the quiet, the way the creek had gone still the moment they locked eyes, the way pain hadn't screamed, the way help had been accepted, then returned. He remembered the weight of that first trap, the blood, the patience, the silence. And now, months later, he remembered the presence, still out there, still watching, not waiting, just keeping. And every time he crossed that bridge, no matter the weather, no matter the hour, he felt it, that he wasn't walking alone. Not really. Some debts don't get repaid. They get carried. Stone by stone, plank by plank. And when you walk right, the forest lets you. Not forever. Just enough. Just long enough to know it saw you first, and chose not to turn away. Sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest. They don't arrive with noise or spectacle. They don't demand to be remembered. Instead, they settle into the corners of our hearts like dusk on a field. Soft, certain, and impossible to ignore. This was never a story about fear. It was about what we choose to see when the world offers us something unknown. About the spaces between words, the pauses between actions, and the silences we keep not out of secrecy, but out of respect. Because not everything in this world is meant to be claimed. Some things, like trust or kindness, can only be offered, and only if we're quiet enough to notice. The woods in this story, like the woods in life, do not need to speak to be heard. They teach us that presence is a language, that mercy doesn't need applause, that protection can come not from dominance or power, but from a deep, instinctive reverence for life, any life, that crosses our path. In a time when it's easier to look away, there's courage in simply standing still, in watching, in remembering, in choosing to be gentle when we could be otherwise. And maybe that's what this story was really about. That even when the world feels dark, there are still places where quiet goodness endures. Still moments when someone or something chooses not to harm, Not to run, but to stay, to keep, to wait with us until the storm passes. We may never see them again. We may never fully understand what they are or why they helped. But maybe understanding was never the point. Maybe it's enough to know we were seen and spared. So wherever you are, listening to this now, pause, just for a second. Let the weight of your breath remind you that you too are part of something bigger. That the choices you make, even the smallest ones, ripple. That someone, somewhere, might be safer because you decided to care. If this story moved you in any way, we invite you to leave a comment and share your thoughts. Let us know what it stirred in your heart, what memories it brought back, or what you choose to carry forward. And if you'd like more stories like this, gentle, honest, human, we'd be honored if you followed our channel, liked the video, and subscribed so we can keep walking this quiet path together. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling. And thank you, most of all, for remembering that kindness, like the forest, doesn't need to shout to change the world. It just needs someone to notice.